Hey, Sam.
Yeah, man.
How was the Super Bowl?
The Super Bowl was long, is how the Super Bowl was. But it was sloppily played on a field that turned out to be a little bit like ice. Cam Newton had a bad day.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
It seemed like it was a bad week for San Francisco. Like it was like that they didn't do a very good job. That was sort of the perception.
Well, the complaints were, at least the ones that I heard, were that the field, the stadium, is a legitimate 45 miles from San Francisco. It would be like, I mean, Topeka is 45 miles from downtown Kansas City, right? Or maybe Lawrence is.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a haul. And traffic in the Bay Area is much different than traffic here in Kansas City. And I think that's what a lot of people were complaining about, is just kind of the long bus rides. Other than that, you know, and look, like I didn't really care about the bus rides. Bus rides are fine. You can read stuff on your phone. You can talk to people, whatever. But the other thing, there was like a little bit of a, and this will happen every year at the Super Bowl, but like a, you know, American, you know, gluttony like overtakes cities. So there's a lot of stories about how San Francisco is trying to kick all the homeless people out of, you know, kind of the Super Bowl area, which if they were legitimately trying to do that, they did a really bad job because there were homeless people everywhere.
Laughing about that. Yeah.
You know, and so I don't know. It was fine. I mean, I didn't have a strong feeling about it one way or the other.
Okay. Should we talk about the Royals?
I guess we should.
Okay.
The baseball team?
Yeah. This is Rustin Dodd, and you're listening to the Sports Beat KC. Sam Mellinger is back from the Super Bowl.
Hello.
He's back in the office, and Chris Fickett, producer, editor, is on the board.
Hello. Ones and twos.
So this is going to be our big blowout Royals spring training preview podcast. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so if anything goes wrong or anything happens in the next 3 to 4 days, we may not be talking about that specifically. So we'll hope nothing happens from now to early next week, but
that's all we can do is hope.
But I'll be down in Surprise starting on Monday, February 15th. So Sam, let's get to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. We've been kind of rolling it out all week. This week, kind of the bigger storylines heading into spring training. And one interesting thing about the Royals is that we've talked about this, but there's just like not a lot of drama around this team. I mean, there's not a lot of intrigue about who's going to be on the 25-man roster. There's not a lot of questions about, you know, what the team is going to look like on opening day against the Mets. But I guess there are two questions, and that would be second base and right field. So let's start at second base. The Royals say that Omar Infante is going to get a look. He's got 2 years left on his deal plus a team option. How do you handicap this race between Infante and Christian Colon and, you know, Raul Mondesi maybe down the road as a possible third option?
Yeah, I mean, so like with the regular caveat about, you know, major injury or, you know, Omar Infante needing his Toradol shots, you know, in March instead of during the season, you know, as long as he is like sort of healthy at least, I think it's Omar Infante's job on opening day. I just think they want to give him every chance. And, you know, if you listen, you know, it's subtle and it's between the lines and stuff like that. But if you listen to the way they talk about Omar Infante, they talk about him the way that they would talk about their starting second baseman. And, you know, look, behind the scenes, they're not fooled. Like behind the scenes, they would love to get rid of him because that's a terrible contract and he's not a good player. But if that shoulder, you know, gets back a little bit, he can be a placeholder at least. And look, I mean, like the Royals are spending more than they ever have and all that stuff, but that's still a lot of money to be paying a player not to play. So I guess what I'm saying is I think it's Omar Infante's job to lose, and I expect he will lose it at some point, but I think they want to go through that process.
Yeah, I mean, he did have surgery to remove some bone chips at the beginning of the offseason. You wonder how much is his decline as a player due to his body breaking down, or, you know, can he get healthy enough to the point where he could get back to, you know, a replacement level hitter or, you know, a serviceable hitter?
So I the problem is every free agent contract, and that goes for Ian Kennedy, it goes for Alex Gordon. every team that signs a free agent, for a certain amount of money, they usually are expecting that last year of that contract and maybe the last 2 years of that contract to not be worth the money. But that's the price of getting the front end, because when you're signing a free agent, it's because you have a need and you need to plug a hole right now. And that's what the Royals were doing with Omar Infante because, Christian Colon wasn't ready. They just, for a long time, they just didn't have any second baseman. So now we're getting to the point in Omar Infante's contract where these are the years that the Royals expected him to not necessarily be the player that they were signing. So from that point, I think it's a concern. It's a huge concern. Because if the contract went the way that the Royals, in their most honest state, not what they say in a press conference, but their most honest state, if the contract went the way that they expected, he would have been a good player. Because it's easy to forget now. He was a good hitter.
Yeah.
And a pretty decent fielder his last year in Detroit. So you expect to get 90% of that, if not 100, and then, maybe 80% of that, if not 90, the second year. But now we're in the part of that contract where you expect him to be kind of, in your term, like a replacement level hitter. So that's concerning. I don't think that guys I think he's going to turn, or he just turned 34. So it's hard to imagine. This is not 2001 anymore, where guys magically got healthy and stronger as they aged. And I think expecting that or hoping that is a long shot.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about Christian Colon is obviously there's some question marks with his defense, and the Royals are an organization that are they don't want to put guys out there that are not going to be kind of plus defenders. It doesn't kind of fit their profile, but if you just look at his pure numbers, offensively, last year he was actually pretty good. Even he didn't have a lot of at-bats, but his OBP, I think, was around 350 or something a little less than that. You're talking about even if there is a defensive downgrade, the upgrade that you're looking at offensively could be some to the point where at some point they can't say no to that.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm expecting to happen. That Infante gets the first 2 months or whatever, and maybe a month and a half. And if he's hitting the way that he was hitting last year, then you make a move. The thing about Colon, and scouts say this about a lot of guys, and they're not always right about it. It's obviously like a guessing game, but there is a little bit of that. They used to say this about Gerard Dyson too. Some still do say it about Gerard Dyson, but that Christian Colon will wear down. Yeah. If you play him too much. And I don't know exactly where that comes from. He doesn't, he's not a tall guy, but he's not, he's sturdy player. I think he's competent, but, there's a lot of teams that they'll be playing and trying to beat this year have better second basemen than both Omar Infante and Christian Colon.
Yeah, I've got it in front of me right now. So 107 at-bats last year, 290, 356 on base. So yeah. Obviously, even if he does wear down, you're looking at an offensive upgrade.
Yeah, that'll play. Yeah, they'd be thrilled, and that came with no power.
Yeah,
but if they could get that over 400 plate appearances, 300 plate appearances even, I think they'd be thrilled.
Yeah,
because their offense comes from other places, right? They're not expecting. They're not expecting all their production to come out of second base, obviously.
Yeah, no doubt. And let's just hit on it real quick because I'm sure people will be interested. Raul Mondesi, he's not even 21 until July.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a young 20-year-old.
Yeah. Debuted
in the World Series, likely headed, I would guess, to Omaha to start the year, maybe Northwest Arkansas, depending on what they wanted. I guess how the rosters would shake out. Could you envision any scenario where he's playing second base for the Royals in an extended role at any time in 2016?
Yeah, it would include injuries.
Yeah,
or include those first two guys, both, not one of them, but both of them just falling off. It would include Omar Infante being as bad or worse than he was last year, and then Christian Colon doing the same. But I think the thing about Mondesi, he's wildly talented. He's a switch hitter with some pop and a lot of speed, can defend. But I do think so. Anyway, so you're starting at a point where if you play him at second base, he's not going to hurt you defensively. So that's a thing, like that's a good thing. That means that you can at least, if you don't think that if he flounders offensively that it'll screw with his head or whatever, the fact that he can run and defend means that he's not going to hurt you too much on the big league club. But he is, for all of his talent, and I've never seen him play for any, significant point where I can make a judgment. But the people who have say that he will be a good player, but he does have, I don't know how to say it. Like, he's over aggressive at the plate.
Yeah, well,
he's in the Royal system, right?
Yeah,
so
he's
how
not unlike Alcides Escobar, your other shortstop. So yeah.
But I guess my point is when you bring up a guy,
you might want to give him some more time to work on that at a level where he can manage the competition.
Yeah, if that guy's overly aggressive against Double-A pitching, then big leaguers are probably going to pick him apart. But again, he is wildly talented. Maybe, you challenge him and maybe he lives up to it. But, I do think that the most important thing, and the reason that I do think that it's a possibility that he plays second base at a, relatively frequent clip, is that he can run and he can defend.
Yeah. Okay, let's
sort of like Bubba Starling.
Yeah, let's segue to the outfield then.
Yep.
The one other, obviously heading into opening day against the Mets on April 3rd, the one other position where you might not exactly know who's going to be starting there, although there are signs, would be right field. Now, the Royals have said all offseason that Gerard Dyson is going to get a chance to get extended time kind of for the first time, and Ned Yost a few weeks ago alluded to the fact that they're likely going to start with some platooning involving Dyson and Paulo Orlando. But, these are both guys that, like you said, could be exposed in a more significant or substantial role. So how would you, similar to second base, how would you handicap this race in right field or this kind of situation?
So I'm actually, the more I think about the right field situation, the more I kind of dig it. It's not going to be a huge strength of theirs, obviously, but right off the bat, you've improved defensively. Right off the bat, you have turned the best outfield defense from last year and improved it. That assumes, and I think it's a relatively safe bet because, he'll be healthy, but that assumes that Alex Gordon, is fully back and everything. But so right off the bat, you've improved in a pretty major spot. The other thing is, I think that the concern of exposing Gerard Dyson is lessened when you have Paulo Orlando, and they've got a kind of a line of guys who would be making their debuts, but also talented guys who would be making their debuts behind those guys. So if nothing else, sort of like what we're talking about with Mondesi, even though Gerard Dyson is like 10 years older, but if nothing else, Dyson gives you defense. His arm is better than people give it credit for too, I think. But he covers obviously a ton of ground, and if he can get on base, he's a problem. So I don't see, what's weird, it's like I don't see any way that the combination of Gerard Dyson, that makes it sound too definitive. I think it's a safe bet that the combination of Gerard Dyson and Paulo Orlando give them a significantly more than what Alex Rios gave him. And just offensively. Offensively. Yeah, and that doesn't even, because, Rios, he came on a little bit, but if you look, just his overall year totals, like I would bet you $50 right now. We can't bet, but if we could, I would bet you $50 right now that, OPS, that Dyson and Orlando would be higher than Alex Rios at the end of the year. Just, 162. Plus, it's a step above. It's a grade level above defensively, which I think is really important, with Ian Kennedy and some of these other guys.
Yeah, I think going off what you said, expecting that the rest of the lineup is going to more or less duplicate what they did last season, or some guys will bounce back, some will regress. But as a whole, the rest of the 7-8 guys in the lineup are going to produce. I think it totally makes sense. I was looking at this, and these numbers obviously are always a little bit skewed, especially in small sample sizes and especially with defense. So I'm not even really sure if this is something you want to go off of. But last year, Dyson played in 90 games. You know what his WAR was in the 90 games and 225 plate appearances?
You know, I remember looking at this and being surprised, but go ahead.
2.2.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
big
like
number
for that amount of time playing. And my guess is that the defensive numbers are just really skewed, and he was a really high level defensive player on a small sample size. But I mean, I think if he gives you above average right field defense to that degree, that you could almost argue that even if they're just not even an offensive upgrade over Rios, that it makes sense.
The pair of them,
will play,
yeah, because both those guys, and Dyson's the guy that we talk about as speed, but Orlando can fly as well, and I think his speed is more home to third or first to third or whatever, where Dyson's is, stealing second or, bunting and running down to first. But both those guys can cover a ton of ground. And, I'd be concerned. I'd be very concerned if it was just Dyson or if it was just Orlando. But I think the combination of them just gives you a little bit of depth that, last year it was kind of like Alex Rios or nothing, they didn't feel comfortable playing those other guys, and that was a problem.
Yeah, one thing to watch there, I think, too, is, again, it's a small sample, so who knows, this might have just been really fluky. Last year, Paulo Orlando did sort of have a reverse split where he didn't actually hit that well against left-handed pitching, hit better against righties. That may not bear out over the long term. It probably won't, but I think that is something to watch. If he can handle good left-handed pitching or even just left-handed pitching and give Dyson those days off, I think Dyson just hitting against righties could be a really valuable player if he's playing 75% of the time or whatever that platoon would be.
Yep.
Let's segue to another question. We've been running down, as I mentioned earlier, kind of on kansascity.com. And it'll be in the paper on Sunday. So by the time people listen to this, it might be out in print as well. But just sort of the bigger questions, aside from right field and second base, the right field position, I think, will also kind of dictate what their bench looks like. Obviously, Colon is probably going to be on the roster in some capacity, whether he's playing every day or not. And then you're going to have a backup catcher, whether that's Drew Butera or Tony Cruz. But I'm wondering, I think we talked about this a little bit off air earlier this week, but the Royals probably have a question to ask themselves. Do they want to play 5 outfielders and use that last bench spot for a guy like, heck, I mean, you could even start with Terrence Gore. They did that last year for a little bit and carry him. Since you're playing Dyson every day, you'd also have somebody like a Brett Eibner that could be a backup outfielder. You could go for somebody that's maybe adds a little bit more pop. You could also go to Chesler Cuthbert in the infield and use him, although maybe you want to keep him at Omaha to get more at-bats. Like, how do you see this bench kind of taking shape? Because, I mean, they've got a lot of fluid pieces, and one different thing is they don't have a lot of veteran guys, a lot of guys that are probably well-suited to a bench role. They have a lot of guys that probably they would like to get more everyday work if they could. Yeah,
I mean, I think the last two, I would say, bench spots are going to rotate a lot between Kansas City and Omaha. You remember a few years ago, and I can't remember exactly who the pitchers were now, but they had like 3 or 4 pitchers that were just driving back and forth.
T-Ford and Lewis Coleman.
Yeah. And I don't know how many times those guys went back and forth, but it was a ton. And I could kind of see a similar situation to that this year with those last few bench spots. Because obviously Colon's a big leaguer. And then you have a backup catcher. And then I think Cuthbert is the guy that I think is sort of leading the race or whatever, like amongst those other guys. I think he can play a little bit of shortstop. That's kind of a hole for them. Like they don't have anybody that can give Alcides Escobar a day really without them having a huge worry. And that's a concern that a lot of big league teams have, and it's also a low level concern. But there's I think like between Cuthbert and I do think Mondesi will be up at some point. Bonifacio could be up. You mentioned Eibner. Fuentes could be up. I mean, they've got a lot of guys that'll rotate in that last spot, I think.
Yeah, and the way they use their bench, I mean, it's sort of a kind of a guys don't even really play.
No, right? Yeah, exactly.
So it's like that's the thing. I mean, is if they Cuthbert, perfect bench guy, great talent would be great, but it's like, do you really want him sitting for 3 weeks at a time when he could be at Omaha getting at bats?
Exactly. Yeah, so that accentuates that point you made earlier. But
so I think if they'll rotate through it for no other reason to make sure that these guys are getting work, you know.
Yep.
So, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I wouldn't, I don't know that they would be considered doing this, but if Dyson is in an everyday role, I mean, even could you carry Gore for extended periods of time in just strictly a pinch hitting role? I mean, would that even be? The
pinch
way
running,
that's
you mean.
Pinch hitting. Did I say pinch hitting? Yeah, that'd be Terrence Gore, pinch hitting.
Yeah.
But I mean, the way they use their bench. I mean, if let's say that they're gonna go 2 weeks with barely, Ned Yost doesn't pinch hit. Alcides Escobar and Salvador Perez get a day off. It seems like once a month. So, I mean, it almost feels like if there was a team that could have a guy like Gore on the roster and sustain it without, having any sort of deficiency on the bench. I feel like they could do that. Maybe, not for months at a time, but I feel like they could maybe do it. Although I remember last year he was on the opening day roster, and that experiment ended in about a week or two.
Well, I think what you're doing too is you're making a case for carrying an extra pitcher as well, because the bullpen is awesome, but the bullpen has also been overworked, and that's part of why they signed Ian Kennedy. But they've got, whether it's Duffy or Chris Young in the one rotation spot, that's one. And I'm talking about guys that you can't count on to get into the seventh.
Yeah.
Yordano Ventura, you never know what you're going to get. He could be fabulous. He could throw a no-hitter, and nobody would be that surprised. He could also leave in the third, and nobody would be that surprised. And so you've got Chris Medlin is coming off, a second Tommy John. You just have a lot of guys that you're not sure how deep they're going to get. So if we're talking about, should we carry Terrence Gore, or if you're talking about two other guys that you'd rather have, be getting action in Omaha, or carrying, an extra relief pitcher, if it means, Brian Flynn gets a chance, or if it means, whoever. I just wonder if that might be a better way to go too.
And Tim Collins will be coming off Tommy John, so he's another guy that you could maybe carry as, you're another lefty in the bullpen that's not going to get a lot of work to start the season. So that might be a way they could carry an extra pitcher. Much in the way last year, I think Luke Hochaver was coming off Tommy John. They wanted to carry an extra pitcher sort of to
protection.
Give him, to give him some rope.
Yep.
All right, let's finish up this kind of first section of this podcast, and kind of things that could be better in 2016 and things that could be worse.
Yeah.
Let's start with things that could go wrong.
Okay.
Royals obviously had a lot of things go right last year. They stayed more or less healthy, maybe save for Alex Gordon. They had guys click: Kendrys Morales, Edinson Volquez, Chris Young. All those pieces sort of came together and worked. What do you think are the biggest? I don't know if holes is the right way or flaws, but what are the biggest pitfalls or things that could trip this team up?
All right, so the first one that comes to my mind, and it's probably obvious, but I do think it's also intangible, which kind of sucks. But I do think that it's the most likely thing. If there's one thing that's going to torpedo their season, I think it's how do you react after you're the champion. And I think it's been since the 2000 Yankees. The Yankees won 3 in a row, 98, 99, 2000, I think. It's been that long since a team has repeated. And I think there's something to that. And, I wonder, the same concerns existed a year ago after they ended 29 years and went all the way to the World Series and were on the cover of magazines and talk shows and all that stuff. So, and they obviously passed that test with flying colors, but I think it's different reacting to winning than it is to reacting to not winning. And I think they're going to be fine. I really do. Partly because of how they reacted last year, partly because this is a team that's still, they're not a young team, but they're not yet an old team. They're not quite yet an old team. So I think that they do have, to borrow a phrase, they do have some juice in them that's gonna sustain that. But
who says that?
I don't know. I just something I heard in my head. But yeah, if there's one thing, I just think that would be it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's really easy, and not just we've all like done things like much not as cool as winning the World Series, and maybe sort of like that was pretty cool. I'm going to take the day off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just think that's completely human nature, and it's so intangible, and so like there could be something else that goes wrong, and you blame it on this like complacency thing. So it's kind of weird to even bring up, but I do think that's a thing. I think that exists.
Yeah. Do you think this? You mentioned their youth. They're still a relatively young team. It seems like they've got the same core back. I mean, is this team suited to sort of ignore kind of the complacency factor, or to overcome it? I don't know. I feel like this conversation is so difficult to have.
It is
because it's who really knows.
It's so intangible.
Yeah.
But like even if you forget like the repeating as champions, I think the Phillies, who won in 08, they beat the Rays, and then they got back in 09. I think I may be off a year, and then they lost the World Series. But that's the last team that's even made it. Like won a World Series and then been back to the World Series the next year. So
when was the last time? I mean, the Yankees probably the last team that's been in a World Series 3 years in a row.
Yeah, I would think
probably
that's right.
In 99, 2000, and 2001.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a weird thing because like we're talking about absolute intangible,
and we're also talking about
it exists.
If the Royals win 95 games again and get bounced in the ALDS, I mean, it would be hard to say.
Like they really could have been last year, by the way.
Yeah, it would be hard. It would be hard to be like, you know what, they just didn't have it this year. They just didn't have that grit to win. So,
mental note to like not be the guy that says that at that point, but. But like I do think that too, beyond the like just human nature complacency thing, I'm going to segue into another thing that I think could go wrong in 16 is Edison Volquez. Like Edison Volquez had basically the year of his career, or at least the best year that he's had in a long time, and he pitched, including the playoffs in this. Because I think this is hugely important. He pitched 30 more innings than he ever has in any year in his career, and he was effective. He was their best starting pitcher, their most consistent starting pitcher. I mean, you remember in the playoffs, he was throwing some of the hardest fastballs he ever had.
Yeah, his numbers, not to interrupt, but his numbers were actually not that good in the postseason. But I think he might have been their best starter in the postseason.
They didn't have anybody in the postseason. Yeah.
I mean, if his ERA, he got into the sixth a lot of time and got into trouble and gave up some runs. Mm-hmm. But I think he was probably their best starting pitcher in the postseason. But go ahead.
Yeah. And so I just think that that's a lot of wear and tear on a guy. And, he's a little bit of a workhorse. He's into his early 30s without looking it up. I think he's like 31, 32, something like that. And I feel like he put so much into that whole deal from wire to wire, from April to October, that he's a guy that I just don't expect to be sharp early in the season. And if they're being honest, I don't think the Royals expect him to be, at his sharpest earlier in the season. So that's one of those things, like he was really, really good for you last year. If we're all being honest, he's probably not going to be that good this year. So the difference has to be made up somewhere else.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a thing that could go wrong.
Yeah.
What do you got?
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Well, I was offensively, three guys in particular, Lorenzo Cain, Mike Moustakas, and Eric Hosmer all had career years last year. Mike Moustakas and Lorenzo Cain had career years by far.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're just looking at strictly OPS plus, to use a stat, Moustakas was at 118 last year. Previous career high was 91. I mean, he'd never even really been league average OPS. Cain, really good 2014, batted 300, had the best year of his career, but added an element of power last year. I mean, his home runs were triple whatever he had, doubles career high, best year of his career as well. Hosmer was probably arguably the best year of his career, but not by much. But he's a guy that, if you look at his career, strangely, has been really good in odd-numbered years. He was good in 2011, good in 2013, not that good in 12, not very good in 14.
Terrible in 12.
Yeah.
Got Kevin Seitzer fired.
Yeah, and 14 was, I think he had 9 home runs and then got hot in the playoffs. And so you kind of forget that he wasn't that good that season as well. So I think on some level, you don't need these guys. I mean, these guys are getting into their prime, so you would expect that the age curve, the trajectory of them is going to at the least maintain. But I do wonder if one or two of those guys takes a step back, like you said, you need somebody else is going to have to pick up the offense, because last year they made a jump. I was looking at these numbers earlier today. They made a jump from 9th in the league in runs scored in 2014. They were 6th last year. I think they scored about 70 more runs, but they were still second to last in homers. I mean, they were, all the things that we've talked about.
That was even with adding Kendrys Morales.
Yeah.
Who I think was a big part of that.
Monster year. Yeah.
So, and then you've got Morales. So I think if you got to expect if those guys not to regress, to at least just maybe you don't expect Mike Moustakas to be as good this year. I mean, they're going to have to find offense in other places to sort of replicate the runs scoring they had last year.
I have one more kind of subtle thing that could go, and this is, I don't know if it's a thing that could go wrong or whatever, but compared to their team a year ago, they have much less sort of trade material. When July 31st comes, unless they want to give up Mondesi, unless they make a huge change of heart on somebody like Mondesi or Zimmer, assuming that he's still healthy or whatever, they don't have, they had a depth of pitching last year that they dealt, and they gave it up, and they got Cueto and they got Zobrist, and I can make all the Cueto jokes I want, but would they have won the World Series without those two guys? And that's a very open question. Yeah. And so this year when July 31st comes, that's part of why they signed Ian Kennedy as well. It's going to be much, much harder to, if there's an obvious hole somewhere, it's going to be much, much harder to fill that this year than it was last year.
Can I make a quick Johnny Cueto point?
Let's do it.
I've been, writing these sort of preview capsules and sort of looking at the season and looking at this team. And I don't know do you characterize Cueto as a loss off last year's team, or it's so bizarre because on the one hand, he was awful in September and really didn't add anything. I mean, he essentially replaced Jeremy Guthrie to a degree in the starting rotation. Maybe that doesn't fit perfectly, but you could say he did that. But he wasn't even really much better than Guthrie was last year. In the playoffs, he was also bad half the time, yet he threw a shutout in the World Series. He won Game 5 of the ALDS.
He was terrific. Yeah. The only 2 times they needed him to be good. He was terrible every other time.
So there's nobody else on the Royals pitching staff that you would say, hey, go into I think this guy could throw a shutout in the World Series. Yeah. Maybe Yordan Ventura or somebody like that. And we're Johnny Cueto did that. But everything else about him was so mediocre to the point of being bad that it's weird to think about what his loss even means for the Royals.
To the point of we look at those 2 starts in particular, the shutout in the World Series and the Game 5 against Houston. But going into those games, who had confidence, in him in either one of those games? And, I don't know which one would have been worse, but this is a guy who just signed for $130 million, and the Royals basically were afraid, I don't know if that's the right term, but, would not pitch him on the road because they did not think he was mentally strong enough to handle that. So it's a loss, I guess, because of what you're talking about. The thing that matters for the Royals now is the postseason, but they're not a worse team at all in the regular season. You're right. It's such a weird thing.
But it still feels like as you mentioned, they don't have a lot of pieces if they wanted to make a trade midseason. It does feel like the one thing that this team could add is a Johnny Cueto, like a rental at the deadline if they're in position to go for it again. And it's
flaky starting pitcher who will blame his catcher for not holding the target low enough.
They need to pick up a flaky guy who may just throw a couple of shutouts in the World Series when the perfect time comes. That's why it's
ride
like,
horses.
Yeah, so it is bizarre.
Is there any chance their late season acquisition could come from within? That one of these prospects we're talking about makes a. But I mean, when have we seen a prospect just who's been on the verge for a while just make a huge jump and like, oh yeah, we got to play that guy all the time now? Or
the guy who would be that guy, if I can say that, would be Mondesi, both because he's the most talented guy that they have in their system, and he fits a need. Yeah. So that could be, but
I don't see that happening.
No, right.
Starts.
And we're talking about the same position that Ben Zobrist filled last year, and Zobrist was. They expected Zobrist to be good. I don't think they expected him to be that good. So they expected to get more out of Cueto, and I don't think they expected to get that much out of Zobrist. But that's the loss when you're doing your capsules. I'm sure that's the thing you're talking about, right? Like that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Sam, do you want to wrap up this first section, and then we'll come back and
man.
We'll talk about we'll break down who the roster headed to surprise Arizona.
Let's go.
Okay, we'll be back in a minute with part 2 of the Royals Preview Podcast. This is Sports Beat KC.